I think if anybody's an entrepreneur out there, I'd ask the easy question. If you could have 8 million people look at your product for free, what would you do? So an easy question of whether you go on the show. The only downside is if you get torched in there, which I've seen a lot of people do. There's been a lot of problems in there. Seriously, like one thing people don't realize, and I'll say this ahead of time, we're talking about the difficulty, is you have to sit with a counselor for an hour after you're done, or you used to, because you can't walk out of that place if you're depressed or upset or angry or something. You never know what would happen. You cannot leave the room for an hour. I begged him. I was in a great mood. I was like, please let me get out of here. I'm going to go talk to my family, do something else, and like do anything to get out of here. And you can't, because it's a very emotional situation.
Welcome to the Ecomm Breakthrough Podcast. Are you ready to unlock the full potential and growth in your business? You've already crossed 7 figures in sales, but the challenge is knowing how to take your business to the next level. Join Josh Hadley, an 8-figure Ecomm business owner and investor, as he interviews highly successful business owners. Get ready, because you're going to learn specific actions you can take today to help your business reach its full potential and leave a lasting impact on the world.
Welcome to the Ecomm Breakthrough Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hadley, where I interview the top business leaders in e-commerce. Past guests include Kevin King, Aaron Cordovez, and Michael E. Gerber, the author of The E-Myth. Today, I am speaking with Pat Yates. He's actually a returning guest here to the show. In our last conversation, we talked about all things licensing. Pat, as you'll hear in his bio, has a lot of experience working on licenses with different big people such as the NFL, NCAA, etc. So if you're interested in licensing, or you feel like that's something that you can create as a moat around your products, hit the rewind button and go find the other episode with Pat Yates and check that out. This episode, though, is brought to you by Ecomm Breakthrough, where I specialize in investing in and scaling 7-figure companies to 8 figures and beyond. If you're an ambitious e-commerce entrepreneur looking for a partner who can help take your business to the next level, my team and I bring hands-on experience, strategic insights, and the resources needed to fuel your growth. So if you or someone you know is ready to scale or looking for an investment partner, reach out to me directly at josh@ecommbreakthrough.com. That's Ecomm with 2 M's. And let's turn your dreams into reality. Today, I am excited to reintroduce you all to Pat Yates. Pat is a seasoned entrepreneur with a focus on e-commerce. In 2014, he struck a deal with Robert Herjavec on the Emmy Award-winning show Shark Tank. Pat grew his single slipper kiosk business into a multi-million-dollar e-commerce focused brand. During that time, Pat has done licensing deals with DreamWorks, the NCAA, the NFL, and Disney. And in 2015, he struck up a relationship with Mark, who is the founder of Quiet Light Brokerage. And they continued eventually leading to a part where he has become an M&A advisor there with Quiet Light. He speaks on stages around the world, and he is considered an expert in the e-com space. So with that introduction, welcome to the show, Pat.
And you make me sound a lot cooler than I really am. I mean, let my wife hear this. She might think I'm important, Josh.
Well, hey, you are the man. You've been on TV. You've been viewed by millions of people around the world, right?
I actually do have an IMDb page. I can brag about that. Having been on all those shows, I actually did get a page. It wasn't just Shark Tank. I was one of the few that actually did all 3 shows, believe it or not, which is Shark Tank, The Update, which is the same Shark Tank show. But then there was a show called Beyond the Tank, and it was so terrible they canceled it after like 3 years. But I was early enough that I got to do that show as well, which is like a 15-minute segment as well, or a 30-minute segment instead of the 15-minute segment. So it was pretty cool. Yeah,
I love that. So, hey, here's I think an interesting thing we could dive into with our audience real quick. Would be this. You know, you and I were talking just briefly before we hit the record button. That still sounds like you're in kind of like an alumni group with these Shark Tank brands. Tell me what like level of impact Shark Tank has had on your brand. Do you see that as like, hey, if you can get the chance to get your, brand out there, get in front of Shark Tank, pitch it to the sharks, is it worth it? Tell me both the pros and the cons.
Well, I think if anybody's an entrepreneur out there, I'd ask the easy question. If you could have 8 million people look at your product for free, what would you do? So an easy question of whether you go on the show. The only downside is if you get torched in there, which I've seen a lot of people do. There's been a lot of problems in there. Seriously, like one thing people don't realize, and I'll say this ahead of time, we're talking about the difficulty, is you have to sit with a counselor for an hour after you're done, or you used to, because you can't walk out of that place if you're depressed or upset or angry or something. You never know what would happen. You cannot leave the room for an hour. I begged him. I was in a great mood. I was like, please let me get out of here. I'm going to go talk to my family, do something else, and like do anything to get out of here. And you can't, because it's a very emotional situation. And having been on that show, and your business is on the line, it's like you really have to impress, because I know some companies, I've been familiar with companies that have closed and gone bankrupt or whatever, and the business is sort of at that point, they became that person that's on Shark Tank, but then they also failed because it makes them have a whole nother, vision. So there's been some tougher conversations I've seen come out of it. This group that I'm involved in, it's called Shark Tank Pals, and there's a really good group that runs that, and they do a conference every year where we get together and sort of collaborate on ideas on how to grow your business, talk about, trends, and do a lot of speakers. I was lucky enough to be on the opening panel where we had a guy from Inc. magazine that came in and talked, and I'm going to work with his leadership group for high school kids at Columbia and Yale this year, a little bit in the summer too. So there's some really smart people there that are, fostering entrepreneurs, growth, and all of them being Shark Tank companies have certain things in common, that they've had the same kind of license agreements. Once you're on TV, the same kind of people approach you and you get all kinds of opportunities. And the funny thing about it is it's easy as an entrepreneur to get so excited about that. But looking back, I even wish that I'd have been a little slower to take advantage of them, because sometimes when you go to 0 to 60 in a small business, you run outside your means and you look back and say, hey, this is great that I did this, but there were problems to that great situation. So I think this group is great in the sense that they try to stay very philanthropic and educational. And we get together and we do a lot of speaking and idea talking. And like, I ran into an amazing influencer that came there this year that I think can change the way we're doing things. So your hope is that you get together and, find things that you work on. From an M&A standpoint, we go as Quiet Light as a sponsor, so we can help people sort of strategically get their companies in place and then exit in the right manner. I'm working with 5 to 6 companies already in the last couple of years that we're working with to try to help them exit.
Yeah, I think what you hit on, though, is the power of the network, right? Is obviously those people in your alumni group, everybody that's been on Shark Tank, to be able to interact with them. Obviously, they're people that are bringing new ideas to the world and kind of movers and shakers. And so I think that's an important aspect of it. How difficult is it for a brand to get onto Shark Tank? And is there ever a point in time where it's too late, right? Is it like, hey, have you been, your brand's been alive for over 10 years? Yeah, probably not going to get onto Shark Tank. Give me your feedback there.
I don't, I think the products and the markets and stuff like that are agnostic. It doesn't really matter where you're at. I think for me, I'm always in a situation where the businesses that I want to deal with are more e-commerce driven. But if someone's thinking about applying for Shark Tank, it'd be great if you feel like you want to do it. Now, it's not the easiest process. I think when I was doing it, now this is a little ways back, things have changed in a decade. When I was basically on, I'm sure that's a different process. But at that time, it was like a 50-page written application. Now imagine written. No one in e-commerce ever writes anymore. I don't even know how to write letters. I'm functionally illiterate if I'm not signing my name or typing. And I just don't do it really well anymore. So you had to do a handwritten application, which is a real difficult thing. You had all these vetting that you had to do. You had to do all these videos. At the end of the day, when I was done, I was glad I did it all. But during the process, it becomes something that becomes its own job. So you got to realize it's kind of like, developing a division to try to go on a reality show. So you have to commit a lot of time to it, and you need to make sure you do it. So, and again, it's a little nerve wracking in front of the camera. I was like 40 pounds heavier too. It's like terrible. Honestly, it was going so bad for so long in there. It was insane. I thought it would look terrible on TV, but mine turned out pretty good. So, but it's worth its weight in gold if you can get on the show, because you just get so much credibility in the product line. You get to use the as seen on Shark Tank brand as you go forward. And believe it or not, people will search that on Amazon and find it. And if nothing else, it gives you a level of credibility that a television network and something like that has vetted the company. So there are a lot of positives. There are not a whole lot of negatives that came from it. The relationship's been great. The ability to network with people has been great. And for my business, it's been awesome. There are things I could have done better post show, but it was always awesome.
How important do you feel like it is to go in there and make a deal, right? You were able to create a deal with Robert. What's been the level of involvement there? Is it more opening up his Rolodex, contacts? Is it worth the equity you give up? And it sounds like you're saying yes.
I think what's kind of the misnomer about Shark Tank is people think a lot of these deals close. They really don't. There are, but if I'm going to put a percentage on it, it's just not a joke. I would be shocked if 10% of the deals close.
Really?
I'm sure Shark Tank knows. They might know that number, but it's really kind of down to them reporting it correctly. But ones that actually sign an APA, transfer money, and operate together as a partnership is probably less than 10%. There's a lot of collaborations. I can help you these things. When Robert and I, and this is not divulging anything about our deal, we didn't do any money transfer, even though there was a deal that was committed to on the show. We basically did a collaboration agreement for him to help me in a marketing play. And then he didn't put cash up because I didn't need it at the time. And then we used the right resources. So he took me to Disney. He went with me to DreamWorks. We used him for the right things, and Robert had fun with it. Now it's interesting. I'm back looking at whether or not we can find a way to revive this. Robert's kind of on the sunset of his Shark Tank thing and all these different throwback commercials and things. There's a lot of ways to revive something. So we're kind of, investigating some fun things to maybe do there. So we'll see. It's always been a fun process. Robert is literally the fun shark. He's a great guy. And so it's been a great relationship either way, and it's worth its weight in gold on the time that I've been able to work with them.
That's fantastic. Well, I love that. You've got a wealth of experience. So you are our resident Shark Tank expert here on the show.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm not much of an expert in anything, Josh. I'm kind of like, one of those guys that you just never know. I've come up with some crazy ideas sometimes, but it's always fun too. So,
hey, well, you know enough to be dangerous. I do know that. So, Pat, let's kind of pivot our conversation now. Let's talk more about, what you're seeing in the e-commerce space as a whole. You still have your brand, Happy Feet. So you're in the e-commerce space as a seller. You are also an M&A advisor for Quiet Light, which means you're working with brands that want to sell, brands that are looking to acquire other brands. So I'm curious, here we're recording this the top of 2025 right now. What do you see going on in the market right now? And what's happening in the M&A world and what's happening in the e-commerce space that you think our listeners need to know about so they can start making plans for this year?
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of different things. So I'm going to rewind. And the only way to talk about the current situation is talk more about the past a little bit, only because, last year, 2024 was a challenging year for any entrepreneur. It's like, I think people are so shrouded in the election that they didn't really want to admit whether things were good or bad, because if they felt like they were, fans of the current administration, they say things are bad, they're talking against themselves. And other times they don't want to pump it up if it's the other way. So I understand the interpersonal stuff, but overriding message in the last year was things were just terrible. I mean, especially for e-com, because if you're trying to buy a product and you need a loan, you were paying 12.5% interest, 13% interest on SBA deals. So no money was flowing in the SBA. The Small Business Administration had the worst first quarter it's ever had in 2024, which is an incredible thing to think about, as big as the business in SBA was for the 4 years before it with Trump. Now, I'm not saying it's one administration versus the other. Some philosophy stuff went into it, but money just stopped flowing because of interest rates and inflation. And what happened is discretionary items that were relying on discretionary income, which that's why you had the COVID bump. When people had all the money in the bank, they were spending money on discretionary items and never bought. So everybody went through the roof. And then as soon as that was gone, it went. And unfortunately, the COVID second tranche sort of, pushed the inflation to where it actually probably cost people money against their thing. If you went with a 4-year model of 2020 to 2024, your COVID bump got eaten up most likely. It's just when you paid for it. So at the end of the day, I think that people went through really difficult times last year, interpersonally and business-wise. But I think that's relieving. And it's not necessarily, again, a commentary on one administration or the other. There's a lot of consumer confidence now, which is raising business discretionary income. There's a lot of talks of interest rates lowering. There's, a push to be able to, if you read it right, there's a push to eliminate income tax, but which just seems widely a year ago, I never thought that's possible, but there are things that are going to start putting money back in the industry that is going to help e-commerce as well as M&A, and the flow of business sales is really going to happen more as that gets loosened up. So I guess the overriding thing is, it really wasn't bad the first couple of years, the 2 or 3 years of 2021 to 2023. 2024, we got really bad with inflation, investment, and M&A stopped for the most part against our numbers. We watched it, and now the flow is back. So you can tell that there's a change, whether it's mentality of that or money markets or what. I think it's a combination, but I think there's every reason to be incredibly optimistic but hopefully people have cleaned up the problems they had during those times. And, we can go into those. I think in inflationary times, it's great to look at your books and figure out what you can cut. That's a great exercise. People get leaner. And now when businesses start running, hopefully they'll be more profitable. I know that's a long-winded way of answering your question, but
yeah, no, I think
market feel
provides a ton of insight. So you're saying, hey, there's more demand, there's more businesses coming to market now, there's more activity in other people wanting to acquire brands as well, which is great news overall. But as you've been advising people over the last year, right, especially as you went through and basically summed it up to say like 2024 was a pretty crappy year for e-commerce as a whole. Okay. What were you telling anybody that was coming to market wanting to sell their business, and maybe showcase maybe some of the problems that you saw with brands that were trying to exit? That's like, no, you're not ready. Why weren't they ready? Versus what made the other brands that were ready to sell ready?
That's a great question. And I think there's a couple answers to that. One is, I think we got to look at it from the lens of an advisor versus an M&A broker. And those are really semantics. Some people think we're M&A brokers, that we sell companies. Really, we're advisors that try to position you well and make the timing right for when you want to sell your business. So let's look at it from two lenses. Let's look at it on, how was I approaching clients last year? So many would come in and like, Pat, things are tight. I'm tired. I'm really worn out mentally. I just can't handle it. My valuation went from 400,000 to 300,000, and I'm working harder and all these things. And like, normally, if they were ready to sell on a downtrend, I would be honest with them and say, you don't want to right now. You need to get back to business and you need to raise that trajectory, because every 5 to 10,000 that you recoup, it's going to put 25 to 30,000 on your valuation. So think of that incremental gain, that if you just decide to sink back in and grow it in a year, you might be able to get 100,000 or 200,000 more. At Quiet Light, we judge ourselves by the quality of our conversation. And the best conversation is not always, hey, you should list with me because I need to make fees. The answer is really, how am I differential to the business owner who's built their whole life around this company? How do I give them the best advice? So with most of them, I sent them away, which most were like, you understand, I'm interviewing other brokers. I'm like, yeah, well, I'll get you the second time, because right now you're not ready. And the multiple that they're telling you that's getting you excited to sell your company and relieve this pain is something you're going to find out in 4 months. You're going to do a price reduction, and that says something that is unsaid. So when you think about this, you got to think about it as a decision of one of the biggest transactions of your life. Like, people sell a $400,000 home that they have a little bit of equity and they get excited. What if you built this from scratch and you have $400,000 and no debt? It's the biggest decision you've ever made. So don't rush into it in a market that's tough. You wouldn't sell your house in a down market. So what I try to do is give them advice that's actionable, to be able to say, hey, let's figure out where we are and where we want to be, and then set that map versus making an emotional decision. So in 2024, I try to encourage a lot of people not to list. And it's completely what I'm supposed to do. It's like I'm supposed to make money. But like my wife, she's like, why don't you get people to list? I like money. It's like, do something. But I felt like I needed to be honest. So now the tables have turned a little bit. So people are tired and they've gotten things back up. Maybe the holiday season for seasonal was a little bit better, whatever, after the election. There's all the reasons to come back in and get the best information. But that's where we start with it. It's like, let's run your financials. Let's make a smart decision based on metrics, not emotion. And I think that's what I'm trying to get them to slow down and do, and then set that map for when they want to sell. But I think a lot of those people are coming back now because, truthfully, I'm one of the few people. Quiet Light is one of the few brokerages that will tell people simply no. I mean, I understand we need to get business. We're a for-profit company, but the best advice for you is to work on A, B, C, D, E. Keep working with me. Let's update your financials every quarter. I believe that you can get another 100 grand, 150 grand for this. It's about maximizing that exit versus, basically giving them what they want right then, which is to try to sell under duress or in a bad situation. So we try to give that best advice and let them make the decision. To that point, I just spoke with a company that was on, like, believe it or not, they're an 8-figure sales company on about a 20% drop on an 8% advertising drop only. So a 20% advertising drop, 8% sales drop. So you can see part of why. And I was going to send them away because the incremental gain they had would probably be several $1 million. And they're just tired. They're looking to list and they want to sell their business. That's okay, because that's a good reason. But my job was to tell them the best advice. And I tried to turn down an 8-figure listing because it was better for the entrepreneur. But they were so impressed by it, they came back and said, I like your methodology. I don't want to screw around with this. Let's do it the right way. And they're probably going to list. So I think being honest and trying to help them differentially to build the company they spent so much time working on is really the best advice. And the rest sort of take care of itself, truly.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that does separate you in the market from what I've gathered amongst the different like places where you can buy and sell businesses and brokerages and things like that, that Quiet Light has a fantastic reputation. I have not heard anybody that has had a negative thing to say. So, Pat, I am curious though.
Involved.
But despite Pat being involved, it is still a good company.
Right, exactly. Yeah, go ahead.
Pat, I was going to ask you, you had mentioned that, hey, you were sharing some actionable strategies with people when they came to you and you're like, yeah, you're not ready. Okay. So can you maybe list out a few of those actionable strategies that you were giving to these brand owners that weren't ready? And the reason I ask you that is because I think our audience, our e-commerce entrepreneurs, these are hopefully things that they could be implementing in their own business. And if they're not, they can start taking action on them today.
One thing I'll do too, Josh, and I'm sure you'll put this up on the podcast, if anyone will email me, and I'm sure you have it up there at pat@quietlight.com, and ask for a digital version of the Exitpreneur Playbook, which is actually on Amazon. It's a book written by Joe Valley, who is one of our original four that started at Quiet Light. He basically wrote our process in a book that's absolutely amazing if you want to prepare. But let's give some cliff notes on that. If anyone wants it, I'm happy to send a free copy digitally, or you can buy it on Amazon. It's a shameless plug for Joe's book. Joe, you owe me a commission. So when you go into this process, the biggest thing they want to do is get the best information in front of them. So we want to run your financials and make sure we look at them, look at the multiple. Preparation is the biggest thing. So when they come in, we're going to be able to do that, not only from a standpoint of the financials, we're going to look at the strategic side of it. So it's all about preparation. And I don't know if that's answering your question or not. Or is it deeper from there?
Well, I think we go even deeper, right? So preparation of what, right?
So
And
the biggest step. So let's say financials, first of all. The biggest mistake that most people make is they're on accrual financials. So some people don't even know what that is. They don't know what accrual versus cash is. I'll give you the most rudimentary example. If in this month you wrote your vendor a check for $10,000 for product and it landed in your warehouse and you put $10,000 on your cost of goods sold, but it's sitting in your warehouse, you're on cash basis. If you bought $10,000 of product that hit on the last day and you put zero on your sheet because you hadn't sold any of them yet, you're doing it on accrual. And then the next month, if you sell 10 of them, whatever 10 into that number is your accrual. As long as you're on what you shipped that month versus what you bought, you're on accrual. If not, you need to start that process. We can help you understand how to do that. If you're ready to sell, we can even reverse engineer it. We can go in and export your SKU sales, allocate what your actual cost of goods is, ballpark that, and it's enough to be able to list. So the first thing is we need to go through your financials and find what we can save. Like if there's money we can figure out, like if you have an agency that's charging you $5,000 a month when they really should be charging you $2,000, and then some of it's a percentage, then you're burning $36,000 in cash and fees you should be spending. Multiply that times a 3x multiple. I just saved you $108,000 on your sale. You found $100,000 by finding 30 at a 3x multiple. So our goal is to find things that you can change your financials to raise the viability of the business and or give you tips to make strategically the sales go up. So it may take 6 months for you to fix this. We're giving you tips. You're growing the business. So the hope is that trend line goes up and then you list on the long game. And we invest that time ahead of time. We don't charge consulting fees. We don't charge anything. I'm easy to reach on email. I'm happy to help any entrepreneur, but if I can somehow raise their valuation $100,000, they exit, even if we don't sell it, I've done my job because it's about enriching them. You know, it's about the entrepreneur, not about us as brokers. We take a whole different view in it. And honestly, I have a weakness at Quiet Light. Even Chuck, he points it out all the time. I run business away in M&A because I give too much good advice on how to change it. That's not really what I'm supposed to do, but it's actionable for the entrepreneur. So we invest in the long game and relationships versus necessarily looking at the transaction right then.
Awesome. So I think you touched on a really important point there, which is the accrual versus cash basis accounting. And as you mentioned, like if you don't understand the difference, like make sure you do. And I would say for two different reasons. Number one, yes, if you're going to sell your business, you need to have accrual books, but also it is super important. Like the accrual books will help you understand the true health of your business as it stands today, right? Like, are you actually making a profit with what you sold last month and how much you paid for that inventory, et cetera, and how much you paid for advertising? That's one thing.
So I'll give you a great example. I sold a
Okay,
business
let's
2
hear
years
it.
ago. I sold a business 2 years ago that had a cost of goods that looked fairly consistent. But I was looking at it 1 month and it looked like this oddity. So I finally asked the right question. I'm like, you told me these were on accrual. Are you certain of this? So he went back and actually looked into it. And we found out it wasn't on a true accrual because they were buying ahead with the vendor and they were like stocking some and the vendor had it. So he was doing it kind of on a blended basis. But what I even went to the extent of, we were so nervous about it, we exported every single sales SKU. We figured the cost of goods and we reverse engineered it. And what we found out was there was like $360,000 missed in his cost of goods sold, which by the time we did the exercise at a 3x multiple is $1 million. We thought we were going to list it at 1.1 million. We sold that business for 2.3. So
Wow.
you see how huge that becomes. Like, people have to make sure their books are tight. The last thing you want to do is do that. And if you think you're going to sell in a year, why not do it now and invest that year fixing it? Because it's all sold on the trailing 12 months. Imagine if we can find you $5,000 to $7,000 in savings. Let's say it's $7,000. It's a 3x multiple. That's $84,000 in a year. If you run the straight 12 times 3 is $250,000. We just found you. These things matter.
Yeah, I think that is so important. Then I'm gonna focus on it as a current business operator,
Right.
which is you should run both cash basis accounting and accrual. Number one, accrual is going to help you show the status of the health of your business month over month. But the cash basis has two advantages from my perspective. Number one, when is cash coming in and out? Now, there's obviously a cash flow statement, right, that you would have in regular accounting documents. But like, it helps you know, like, oh, this month was bad because we upfronted a bunch of inventory or a bunch of masterminds or whatever that you're paying for. Okay. But number two, here's my biggest like hack or strategy is as it relates to how you pay your taxes. Okay. It is more advantageous. And again, this is not consulting or legal tax advice, but it is more advantageous to file on the cash basis because guess what you can do? Make sure in December you pay for a bunch of inventory up front if you want. Number two, any big insurance premiums that you need to pay for, make sure they get paid by the end of December. Any big masterminds that you're joining or any big expenses, right? I make sure that I pull anything forward from anything that's going to be spent in January to March of the following year. I pull it in to the December of that current year. And then that way it reduces my tax obligation by all of the amount that I just expensed. Now, you're perpetually kicking the can down the road, but go ahead, Pat.
No, and it plans your cash out. But I think it's a great idea. The only thing that people need to think about is a lot of times when they talk to me about financials, they're scared to death of the things they've done like that. And then personal things they put in it. Don't concern yourself with all that. Just give them raw. Because what's interesting, Josh, the way you did it is great. A lot of people will probably, and the funny thing is, the people out there listening, if you don't have a good advisor, what Josh did will cost you money if you don't understand it in your valuation. Because if he wraps all those expenses in and he basically puts it on his December P&L for the next year, he's accelerated his expenses at a level that he shouldn't. Whatever he paid out is against the multiple he's losing. But if you talk to an advisor and we add that back because we explain exactly what it is, we can flip cash to accrual on paper. We don't have to do it on the books. The goal here is that your taxes match the P&L with some methodology in between of how you arrived at the two different numbers. Meaning, okay, I paid, because I got a discount, I bought $30,000 worth of product with my vendor ahead of time because they gave me a $6,000 discount to pay the money now in December. That's allocated then. We use it as an add back. As long as it's there, buyers get it. It just has to be documented. The four pillars of a sale: risk, growth, transferability, and documentation. That one falls under documentation. We can fix anything if you can explain it, but if you have to uncover it as a buyer in diligence, it's a big problem. Get ahead of it and make sure that it's lined out, and you can explain anything you've done with your financials to any buyer. They'll be fine with it. They just need to know how you did it.
Yeah, I think, and I love that. I think like there are things that you can do in your business that will be added back as a add back to enhance the valuation of your business. So
I had two interesting add back situations.
Let's hear it.
We had a content site for a kitchen thing. She remodeled her kitchen and did it as a write-off on her taxes, and it went through on her taxes, and she did it as an add back when she sold the company, and she got the add back. Amazed that. The second one on the add backs is out of stocks. If you're in a heavy selling season, you go out of stock for 4 or 5 weeks, document it, because we will go back and actualize those periods of sales, and we will explain why they would have been there due to supply chain. We will add that into your multiple because you're out of stock. Those are things to think about. I had one company that lost about $1.1 million in sales due to out of stocks. We put it back, and the person at a portion bought it out times the multiple is about $1 million difference in price.
Wow, that's massive. Amazing. And that's why you work with an advisor like yourself. You know all these little nuances.
I don't know. I'm like the king of useless information, Josh. I got more useless shit than I know. I can't cuss on the thing. My wife's gonna be mad at me. I cussed on the podcast again. I'm in trouble now.
Hey, well, Pat, I'm curious to flip the script now to focus more on maybe like the growth levers of the business, right? That's one of the things that you touched on to say, hey, go back and try to boost back up your revenue, right? Like it is not good for you to be trying to sell in a downturn. So what were the actionable strategies that you shared with people to say, hey, here's how you can become either more profitable or increase the overall sales and revenue for the brand?
That's a great question. I think business we talk to are so different. Like one day I'll talk to a SaaS company that's software driven, another day an e-com business, another content. So it varies so widely. It's hard to give one piece. I think that what I try to tell people is look at managed growth. Make sure you're not throwing good money at bad to try to raise the top line when you're not adding anything to the bottom line. If you're introducing products, you're making changes to the business that are significant. Like Chuck talks about this, you don't want to fix everything in your business. Like if you have an opportunity to grow something, people look at that as a growth lever and they may buy it because of that. But if there's something that you say to someone, oh, by the way, if you only sold 20,000 of these, I know it's going to hit, then take the time to do it, prove the model and add it on. Because like if you think you can sell 20 or 30,000 to the bottom line profit, then do it and add it onto the multiple, then explain how you did it. It's like monetize it before you sell it is the best way to put that if you have upside. But if you're at the point where you're ready to sell, it's just clean this up and make sure it is. SOPs, things like that. The one overriding thing that I got from entrepreneurs being tired was they try to rush the process at this point. You've done all the tough work. Slow down, do the right things, and if you need 3 to 6 months to clean things up and change the trajectory, do it. The one caution, sometimes entrepreneurs aren't very honest with themselves. I had so many people 2 years ago said, oh, all I got to do is keep doing what I'm doing. I'm going to grow at 30% more this year. And then they come back at 25% down and they made a 50% turn in what they do, and they're disappointed. So sometimes being realistic on what you can and can't do is extremely important. And sometimes, it may be the right thing to say, hey, it's just time for me to sell it. There's all kinds of reasons why you would do it and keep going. Sorry, my video buckled there a second.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think like you've got to be honest with yourself. And I think any entrepreneur needs to walk into an exit with the frame of mindset of like, this thing is going to take you anywhere from 3 to 12 months, right? I mean, what's the standard time when somebody reaches out to you by the time that they have, let's call it the check in hand?
Well, let's put it this way. I think most of the people, if I have an average, probably 3 to 6 months, I'll work with them before they list. But there's a lot of people that come in and they're ready. So let's say they come in and they're ready and we list. Usually it takes us 14 days to 20 days to put the package of CIM together. Marketing and sales to the business on average is about 94 days, which, that depends on attorneys, which we all know how that is. And so it can increase. So the aggregate in there is probably from launch to finish 95 to 100 days. But then there's a month or so before it. So I tell people, it's probably a 3 to 5 month process if you want to maybe aggregate it. If it's an SBA deal, it's probably on the high end of that. It may be a little longer, but again, you don't want to rush the process. You want to be right. And hopefully Quiet Light, we try to have a really solid buyer pool. Like we have such great buyers that our businesses don't sit long. We pretty much will know 30 to 60 days in what the deal is going to be and adjustments that would need to be made. So it's a living, breathing situation. So we adapt and maybe change price or marketing or whatever we do several times.
Awesome. That makes a ton of sense. Pat, I want to also dive into more about like multiples. Can you give our audience maybe an understanding of like, where do multiples currently stand in the current environment, and also like, and who the buyers are in the different thresholds, right? Because from my perspective, and you tell me whether I'm right or wrong here, if you have EBITDA somewhere between 0 to 5 million, you're going to be somewhere around a 3x. But once you cross that 5 million in EBITDA, it seems like you start to hit an exponential curve where you start to hit 6x, 7x, even 10x. And then you're working with more private equity deals and things like that. Is that true? Give me maybe like a breakdown of like those different like tiers, I guess.
Your methodology is good. I think that, maybe the number wise, I mean, it's agnostic. It depends on the vertical, like in SaaS and content, it really accelerates multiples because they don't have product costs. So, the net margin is so high in that kind of business that, like in content businesses, you're talking 80 or 90% net margin. It's like you can throw gas on that. It's harder to grow, but it's a great business. So those you get a little more aggressiveness. But so let's talk e-com, which is where most people are going to sit. I mean, we deal with our average transaction is a little bit over $2 million in a transaction, and usually it's probably 4 or 5. But the reason that Quiet Light's lower is because we're very philanthropic with smaller businesses. We'll list $200,000 and $300,000 businesses, which takes the average way down. But some of those, so let's walk through e-com in the $300,000 mark. Let's say that you have your brand and it's like a couple $100,000 you're doing sales. It doesn't have a lot of runway. If it has trademark and maybe patent or other protection, has a moat around it, you're probably talking that 275 to 3 range you could get in plus your inventory. Now, at Quiet Light, we don't include your inventory. A lot of people will give you monthly, like here's your monthly multiple. It's meant to sound huge. It's like whatever, 12 times a number. So if I'm 3X on a year, they're going to say 36X on a month. It's like, sounds like it's huge, but it's just semantics. So to me, you take the business, and if it's like at that number, it's a little risky because it's got lower sales. If it's lower SKUs, like skinny number of SKUs, 3 to 5, let's say, that's really low. You'd have to ding the business there. If it's at 300,000, it might only be 2.25, 2.5 because of the skinny SKUs. If you have huge seasonality, like with my Happy Feet Slippers business, it might ding at 1/4 point and it might go to 3.25. Okay, so then let's assume that's the baseline. If you go up from there and you get to $500,000 in bottom line profit, that might go to 3 to 325 on the same businesses. When you get to $1 million, you're probably talking 325, 35, 375. When you get to 1.5, it's going to go about 1/4 point more. When you get above 2 million, you start to see some private equity interest, but it still needs to go up a little bit. And that's SDE, or what people call EBITDA. So that would be a business probably listed in the $6 to $8 million range. But that starts to creep up in that 3.5, 3.75, 4 area. If you're talking software and content at that level, it might be 4 to 4.25. Now, some e-com can eclipse 4, but you're talking about businesses making $3, $4, $5 million a year and maybe have a growth velocity. If you throw 20 or 30% growth on the top line, it's going to accelerate all those. So I would say that probably the e-com range right now on the lower end, less than $500,000 businesses, is probably like, depending on structure, 225 to 325. If you're at 500,000, I like in that 275 to 325 range, or 3.5. And then when you get to $1 million, you're probably talking at the minimum 325 to 375. So those layers move up a little bit by those increments. A lot of times we go through our old sold businesses in the last few months to kind of get the comps like you would with a house. So we use some general knowledge of what we have going on to try to get to it. But again, it is a little bit of a wild ass guess. It's the best way to put it. It's an educated guess, but we try to go through methodologies of plus and minuses of the business. Legitimately hit a plus for like this much and a minus for this and a plus for this and minus. And we try to get to something. But the biggest thing we try to do is hit the market at a price where it's going to have a chance to sell immediately. When you lower something or you take it off the market, it says something that's unsaid, and you don't want that conversation. So I hate reaching back out to buyers saying, hey, by the way, are you interested in this? We just lowered it 50,000 because we went out too aggressive because the entrepreneur thought their business was worth more than it was. So we try to manage those expectations and set the multiple in a way that we can be conducive to a sale versus problems.
Yeah. Love that. I think it makes a lot of sense. That gives a good lay of the land.
Yeah.
Pat, as we wrap things up, is there anything that you haven't shared that you think, these 7-figure business owners need to know in the e-commerce space as they look to grow in 2025 and beyond?
Yeah. You know what? It's just, I think they need to refocus themselves. And they're in a point where they were just worn out from last year. Well, it's time to be optimistic. If you have challenges in your business, find a new project they get excited about. I think that's where people have been a little mundane. One day I was just bored and I decided I was going to go do all my descriptions in ChatGPT, SEO friendly. I was like, help me build some SEO on my site by just changing this up. Use some emojis, do all these things. I did it and I redid every one of them. It was fun. And I actually found a way to sort of invest in my product. I think I think if entrepreneurs are tired, find a way to get passionate. If they're looking to sell, get the right information. Email me. And look, we can do all of it via email. Someone says, Pat, look, I listen to the podcast and I'd love to have a valuation. I don't have time to get on Zoom, but what do you need? I have a simple email that shows a QuickBooks report that I need. And I send back one of the most detailed financial reports you could ever see. And it's going to give you an idea of where your price and stuff's going to be. And that's great information to work from. It's like, I think people out there are sort of wondering where they are all the time, and they're scared to ask the right question. And the biggest thing is entrepreneurs really rely on their own knowledge. Open up your knowledge to a network of people. Have them help you get growing. Find out what you're having problems with and network it and find a way to make it exciting. I think the biggest problem I've seen with entrepreneurs that are just kind of worn out. It's been a few years that's been tough for e-commerce.
Yeah. I agree. It has not been easy, especially with Amazon increasing their fees. There's margin compression going on. But that's not going to change. I mean, that is the environment, and Amazon is going to remain a very competitive marketplace to sell on. And so, Pat, as we wrap things up today, I love to leave our audience with 3 actionable takeaways from every episode. So here are the 3 takeaways that I noted. You let me know if I'm missing something.
All right.
Action item number 1, I'm going to throw this out here because we started off the podcast with this, is if you believe that your product appeals to a broad audience, Shark Tank should be something that you should consider setting your sights on. Because as you mentioned, like, hey, what would you do to put your product in front of 8 million viewers for free? Like, that's what Shark Tank affords, let alone what you talked about, Pat, is like, there's like alumni groups for people just going through Shark Tank, and like the business owners, the network that you create there, I think can be game changing. And then whether or not you actually get money from any of these sharks, I think the interesting thing is what you talked about with Robert Herjavec is like, he opened the doors for you to get the licensing deals that you needed to get. And so see that as an opportunity. It is a growth lever for the right brand. So something worth noodling on.
Yeah, I encourage anyone that has interest in doing Shark Tank, you can reach out to me about the process. It's difficult, but it's not impossible to navigate. I think the year that I did it, 2014, believe it or not, they had 39,000 applications, and I think they took like 90 companies. So it's really, really hard, but it's a process that's worth it. There's a lot of shows out there. There's a lot of things you can do, but building, a presence around your brand, that's definitely a great way to do it.
Yeah. Excellent advice. All right. Action item number 2 is I would recommend running accrual books and cash basis books for all of your accounting, whether you're doing your accounting internally and you have a hired team member, or you're outsourcing it to an accounting partner. Even when we had our accounting was outsourced originally, and we had that accounting firm was going in and running accrual books and cash basis books for us. And we have been filing our taxes on the cash basis books for all of the reasons I previously mentioned, namely tax purposes. And I cannot reiterate how important this is, because so many people, if you don't kind of move forward and claw in all of the expenses that you're about to have in early Q1 of the following year, number 1, you're paying taxes, right? The percentage of tax that you're paying is on all of that income that you generated from that previous year. If I can move expenses forward, yes, I know I'm kicking the can down the road. However, what I am doing is I'm saving more of my cash and sitting on it for another 12 months rather than necessarily letting the government sit on it. So
I think you make strategic. We push everyone to be on accrual basis because we feel like that's the best way to sell it. But there's a lot of ways to get there. The way that you're talking about, it's a great tax event. Like, I'm going to brag on you. If anyone wants to understand how to structure credit cards in their business, Josh is the guy to talk to. He's got, first of all, your presentation is incredible. I know we're going to be at BDSS in Iceland together. I can't wait to hear it again, or whatever you work on. But I brag on you from that. So I think people can really learn a lot from you and the way they structure things financially. The tax thing is really important. But anything we need to flip to accrual, if you want to take advantage of what Josh is talking about on cash for your taxes, do it. We just have to have the link back to be able to explain it to buyers why the methodology was there and what the real valuation is, because you're leaving money on the table from the cash basis methodology. We just need to make sure that we draw that back in.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks for the shout out, Pat. Your $5 is in the mail. All right. The third and final action item that I have for you is focus on growth in your business. Yeah. Pat, I think the biggest summary that you talked about as you've been speaking with all of these brand owners is like, they're coming in, they're tired, they're seeing a downturn in their business, and they're like, I just want out, right? And you're saying, no, that's not a good time for you to be trying to exit. Like, try to go grow your revenue. And as you stated, Pat, like, one of the important things is like, you can see that just by having a 20% year over year growth rate, that can add an extra 0.25% to your multiple, right? And more, right? The higher that growth rate becomes. So with that being said, as the CEO of the business, I hope all of the listeners, your number one priority should always be focused on the growth in the business. Once you cross 7 figures, it's easy to get caught up in the weeds of business, right? It's easy to get caught up with, oh, I've got a bunch of emails, I got a bunch of conferences to attend, I've got a bunch of, I got to manage this team member, I need to hire that team member. That's fine. However, growth and sales beget all in the business. And there's nobody better to focus on the sales and growth than the CEO themselves. So focus on that. Look for those retail channels. Look for the TikTok shops. Look for those distribution channels that you can leverage to grow your sales.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. I mean, I think that, people are smart about their bottom line and their expenses, and they work smart to turn the top line. They can definitely be there. The biggest thing is to make sure that you're on the right revenue run. If you're on a 15% drop for 6 months straight, let's figure out how to get that to a 3% growth rate for 4, so you look like you turn the tide. That'll impact the multiple. All you want to do is sit down and have someone look at the financials and give you the best advice if you're thinking about an exit in the next year or two, and then set your sights on it. And you can achieve it all, like SOPs, things like that. You do concurrently if you need to build them, and we help you figure out all the things you need to do to get prepared.
That's fantastic. Excellent words of wisdom, Pat. All right, Pat, as we leave the audience, I'd love to ask the following 3 questions. So, number 1, I know I didn't preempt you for this, but I'm going to ask you, what is your favorite book that you've read and why?
Oh, you know what? I probably the best book I ever read was Delivering Happiness, Tony Asang, the guy that started Zappos. If you never read a customer service book, it's one that I just couldn't stop talking about. It wasn't the most actionable book. It wasn't the best book I ever read, but Tony Asang's book, Delivering Happiness, read that if you're a customer service person. It's like an old school version of now new school stuff. He was way ahead of his time in that. I don't really, I'll be honest with you, my reading is down to 400 emails a week, it seems like, or 500 emails a day. It seems like, I don't know what the number is. So I haven't read as many books. I'm kind of like a little bit less patient to do that. I'm sure you're shocked at that, Josh, as fast as I move, that I can't sit still and read books. I'm kind of like, it's weird because a lot of people would know this about me. I'm kind of like a weird, anxious guy at times. And I think I've got this weird thing, and I actually coach a guy. So I'm doing a lot of business coaching and consulting anymore. And actually one of my clients asked me to read this, which is called Scattered Minds, which is an ADHD book. Kind of like, I think that when I was young, I sort of had that way, and it's something that focus I struggle with. I'm really anxious to read this because he said it was extremely actionable for people that struggle with trying to focus in on tasks. So for entrepreneurs, I mean, you might look it up. I mean, he's a great entrepreneur called Scattered Minds. I bought it on Amazon. I plan to read this, but I'm not a huge reader. I don't know. I'm too boring for that.
For me, it's all about Audible, right? Picking up the kids to and from school, etc. All about the Audible books.
That's right, man. Something like that.
All right, Pat. Excellent book recommendations, though. Like that. Yeah. All right. Next question I have for you is, what is a AI tool or maybe a Chat GPT prompt that you think has been game changing for you that you're using in your own business?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we're using. Some things that are more deep systems wise that, probably not as much. I think with me, I gave you one. I redid mine. Like, Ecomm people, you'd be shocked. Go in and copy and paste the URL of your item on your Shopify site. Go in and say, I don't know the best prompt, Josh. I'm not, but write me an SEO friendly description of this product. It's Disney related, so put some fun puns to it. And it cranked them out, and they were so cool. And I just had fun reading them as much as putting them in, because I knew that the customers, when they read them, was going to be fun. So that was one actual thing that was more fun than anything. ChatGPT will do it instantly. I use it a lot of times for business structure and then follow up. So as an example with me, client-based company, I will use my recordings of my audio meetings and things like that and notes that I have on email, and I'll put them in and aggregate the information to put outlines and make sure I'm looking at actionable tips for the clients. So I'm using them from a structure standpoint of how to get better for clients, as well as in an actual standpoint of the actual CIMs. We're using a lot to mine out good data analytics from stuff we're getting from them. So there's so many, Josh, it's crazy. I'll give you one good example of a small one that I did. I was putting out a SIM the other day for a business that's Amazon 100%. And I decided to, for the first time, and it seems like we should be doing this all the time, but it's like sometimes it's a little bit of overkill. I had him give me read-only access to the reports in the business reporting section of Amazon. I went in and it'll do 2 years exactly. So I didn't even guess at the trailing 12 months date. I just said export 2 years on a business report that showed the sessions, conversion rate, all this, as well as sales and traffic, which if people are Amazon, they know these reports. I took them and put them into ChatGPT and had it analyze the year-over-year numbers like it was a sales number from a session standpoint, from a conversion standpoint, sales in consumer and B2B. And it turned out, I found out B2B had a 300% higher conversion rate in this business that I listed versus the consumer one, which meant there's a huge business play. So I mined out a good information there via that. I think what it can do for you is expand your knowledge. It's a little scary because sometimes it's garbage in, garbage out. You really got to rely on checking the numbers. But I'm using a ton. Like you're in Riverside, so you understand that. It's got an unbelievable editing tool if you do video. I'm using Sheets, which is an interesting one I'm messing with for some Excel workbook stuff. I use Claude every day and some stuff for Quiet Light, and I use ChatGPT, some of them with custom GPTs and things of that sort that I'm trying to put. I am an older guy. I'm old as hell, Josh. First, that's not a cuss word, so she's not getting mad. I'm really old, so like I felt like I was kind of behind the technology stuff last 5 years. No joke. The older I get, the less I want to do things. I'm old and jaded and boring. So I really felt like I was behind in technology. But now that AI is here, I'm trying to get on the front end of it, so I understand a little more how I can leverage it. And from a standpoint for my companies and as well as M&A, I'm just becoming better informed for my clients, which is a big part of that is mining out the information. But there's so many I'm trying out right now. It's hard to list them.
Oh, those are excellent points. And I think that is the important aspect of AI, though, is like it is moving so quick right now that, by the time this is even released a few weeks from now, right? Like it's already outdated to some extent.
I get so many requests for things that people want to work with me on. I have challenged myself this year to stop trying to figure out through someone else, that I'm just going to go in and I'm going to start using an AI system and I'm going to reverse engineer the best way to do it, because I'm not even sure asking people advice on AI is great right now. It not only changes so fast, it's so new. It's like people know one thing and then they're trying to learn things from other people. What I'm trying to do is dive in and say, I'm going to spend 5 times longer than I should on this right now, but I'm going to learn it from an automation standpoint. So I only have to do it once in the next 20 times. So it's like I'm trying to get better at understanding those workflows and how I can, because I'm one of those people, and I'm sure you're probably like this, Josh. I know you're a very busy guy as much as you speak and do things. I'm trying to find time in my day. And if I can find 2 hours by efficiencies a week, then I'm going to try to do that. And AI is able to do that. It's just a matter of finding the right ways.
Yep. And I think the future becomes very, very interesting with what it will do. Pat, as we wrap things up, final question here is, who do you respect or admire the most in the e-commerce space that you think other people should be following, and why?
Wow, that's a good one. Man, I really don't know. Everybody's so diversely different. It's like I like some people just because they're cool, and I think they're cool to talk to. There's a lot of driven entrepreneurs. I don't know. I have so many people that I'm meeting with. Like I'm talking to a guy next week that, they're working on social network predictive technology based on your retinas and how you respond. I mean, when you respond, like if you're happy or sad, and social networks and how it's going to work your feeds. It's really some amazing things that I'm looking at. So it's hard to figure out what the best one is. E-commerce wise, I mean, you've named some. I mean, you understand who Kevin King is. We both go to BDSS. Kevin's an amazing resource. There's people out there that do a lot of webinars and things like that. If people are looking for it, look up shows like Prosper, which I go to, which is a great system show that you can see in Las Vegas. Very inexpensive to get in there and learn how to grow your e-commerce business. Other masterminds like BDSS, $1 Billion Seller Summit, things like that are great ways to go out and grow your network. We go to a ton of shows. So I think the biggest thing is if you have an issue that you need dealt with, network till you find the expert, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Like, I think that's the biggest thing in the Shark Tank group. Everybody there thinks they have to be the smartest people in the room because they're on Shark Tank. It really isn't like that. they're just people too. And until you sit down and sort of admit that, like, entrepreneurs suck at admitting they're terrible at things. So admit it and then find out how to get it better. I mean, I think people need to not be as veiled in secrecy of the problems and open up to the right people, utilize the resources of people around it. I'm happy to sit with anyone, anytime, and try to help them increase their business and exit it. Just utilize the resources around you and then be passionate. A lot of people are beat up and they're tired. Get that focus back. It's
all about the networking. All about the networking.
Yep,
that's for sure. Pat, if people want to follow you, they want to learn more about you, where can they do so?
I have tens of followers on social, so if they want to join me, they'll have me trending, Josh. No, I'm kidding. So I'm on LinkedIn, obviously Pat Yates. I think it might be Pat Yates 20 or something. On there, you'll find me Quiet Light and Happy Feet Slippers. But on social, otherwise, my other stuff's boring. I don't put any good pictures out. I've been married a long time. You don't want me on other social. But but they can reach out to me at pat@quietlight.com or through LinkedIn. It's the easiest way to do that. Yeah, or pat@buyhappyfeet.com or Happy Feet Slippers business.
Awesome. Pat, this has been a great episode. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us. And until next time.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Josh. Wisdom must be a loose word over there.
Thank you for listening. Visit ecommbreakthrough.com for more information. If you've enjoyed today's episode, the best way you can show your appreciation is by clicking the subscribe button and quickly leaving a review. See you again next time.